Hello and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. As you can see today, we're having an author's conversation and I am super excited to welcome into our conversation Genevieve Hawkins. And Genevieve, we always like to start with, how's your week been?
I've had an awesome week, Danette, and not because there's been anything significant and amazing other than, when I'm a yoga person and I've had just a couple of really good yoga lessons, particularly with a new teacher that I hadn't had before. And it was like, feeling grounded and excited and feeling more joy and awe for the week.
What a gorgeous start to the week then. Oh, I love that.
It's been brilliant.
So let's get into, we love you to introduce yourself. So I'd really love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and also just your journey to how you've got to here.
Oh, now, so how long did you say we had?
Hours.
No, well, look, I mean, I think in the context of, we haven't sort of talked about the book that's about to come out, my second book called Shrinking Elephants. And in fact, when you're saying, tell me about the journey, I'd go, I've been an elephant shrinker from way back. So that really, from a journey perspective for me, so I started my career as an occupational therapist. And so had always had a fascination with how people not just survive, but thrive in the world. And so always had that bent towards understanding mental health, mental illness yet, but more mental health. How do we optimize mental health? But likewise, at the same time that I was studying OT, I had this particularly really, really uncomfortable personal situation that I was working through with a family member and his then partner, in which I found myself feeling helpless. So feeling stuck where the relationship had broken down in a way that I couldn't quite understand and I couldn't work out how to navigate it, and felt completely distraught at what was happening to my relationship with my brother because of that, because he was an idol for me. And I remember how horrible that felt. And as we got out of it, and there's a whole long, that could be a whole podcast in and of itself, but actually what I came to this resolve was saying, I never want to feel like that again. I never want to feel like I'm sitting in a situation with people and can't work out how to navigate that world. And I feel like that shaped my whole journey. So I've spent most of my career in injury or illness management, as well as then injury and illness prevention within the workplace. And really constantly what I was seeing within this is this common theme around people not getting connected enough to themselves and not able to have the conversations that they wanted to have. So yeah, outside of all of my work in business advice, so my tagline is I help people have the conversations they need to have, including with themselves. I wrote a book back in 2020, or wrote it before 2020, but published a book in 2020 on mental health in the workplace called Mentally at Work, and then have come on now to write this second book called Shrinking Elephants.
So let's get straight into that book. So what inspired you, given you'd written one book already, what inspired you to write the new book, Shrinking Elephants?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a sucker for punishment, aren't I, in going for a second one? I wasn't planning on it. In fact, wasn't even planning on the first one. I kind of got encouraged to go write this book. So I think I'd say that there's kind of a few different things to combine that actually got me writing the second book. The first one was actually, as I was writing the first book, there was particular sections where I go, I feel like I've got so much more to say, but you've got to be careful about how much you write in one book. So there was kind of this kernel of, I feel like unpacking conflict is a big thing around mental health and how we actually look after our mental health. So I kind of put that to side going, I probably wouldn't mind talking about that a bit more. But what I found also was I think that this was a constant theme of request from people, or a constant area that I was giving advice in, particularly in the context of people who'd been bullied or harassed or dealing with horrific situations in the workplace where they weren't coping, that advice around conflict was a fairly common thing. But also what I saw were the repeat patterns of what people weren't doing in conflict. And because Mentally at Work seemed to land well, like I kind of first of all thought I'm just a book, one or two people might read it, and if it helps a couple of people, great. Ends up lots of people bought it, and lots of people saying, actually, the way that you're talking about it makes sense and it's really practical. That I thought, okay, I think it's time. I need to write about conflict.
Nice, nice. And yeah, my experience doing lots of training is conflict is an area most people avoid. So really love
Yes.
to get into the whole elephant thing, which is around the elephants in the room. So what are some of the elephants that people encounter in the workplace?
Yeah, so it is, and that's kind of where I came to with, whilst this broader book is around conflict, and what's conflict as a whole, there's this idea of saying there's these elephants in the room that we don't want to talk about. And the not talking about them is actually ultimately what creates what I call, to begin with, quiet conflict. So it's not obvious,
Yeah.
but it's sitting inside people, and it sits there and it festers and it's challenging before you actually then get to a point of it becomes loud because people are just so not coping or dealing with things anymore that it can explode and then cause all sorts of other problems. So you want to think about some of these and reflect on workplaces that you've been in before. And, some of those common proverbial elephants are things like everyone knows that there's this one person who's really difficult to deal with, but no one's really saying anything, but they feel tense every time the person walks in the room, or the person that really is just in the wrong job. They're not
Yes.
really capable, but everyone's kind of tiptoeing around it, or making excuses, or how do we kind of, no, we don't navigate it. We just hold on to it and don't talk about it. To the things around, complaints about the systems are horrendous, but senior management don't seem to recognise that, or they just say it's easy, you can do this, and everyone's going, have you dealt with these systems? Do you know how long it takes? And the tension builds. Or the examples of saying, we say one thing in a meeting and everyone goes, we agree, this is what we're doing. And then you come out of the meeting and all of a sudden people are doing something different to what was agreed. Or, here's another example that you're sitting there struggling. Talk about the person that feels like out of the depth, that you're sitting there going, I'm not really feeling comfortable or supported in what I'm doing, but I don't feel like I can have that conversation. So all of those are these elephants that sit in this room. And if we don't talk about them and acknowledge them and try and understand them, or as I talk about, triangulate them from lots of different angles, that tension, that conflict builds, and it starts just within us. It can become dysfunction between people, or it can then actually get to the point that it really blows up.
So tell us a little bit more about what grows them and makes them louder. So you've just sort of hinted a couple there.
Yeah.
What goes on that they go from maybe being this big to
big?
blow up?
It's interesting. So there's two parts to it to think about. The first one is just how our brains work. And the amount of, so I talk about the fact that we wear multiple lenses over our eyes. And there are many lenses that we are just not aware of, which is actually where elephants start to grow, actually, because we have these lenses, and because we're not aware that we're wearing them, we see the world in a particular way and assume that that is the reality that everyone sees. And so when someone else behaves in a way that grates with us or challenges us or makes us feel uncomfortable, we're like, well, why on earth are they doing that? Because that's horrible, or that's dreadful, or they're making me feel like that. Because we're wearing these lenses that we don't realise. And so our elephants grow. So elephants exist in the first place because we do have those different perspectives. Those lenses from, the deepest of them are from childhood.
Yeah.
So the way in which our early childhood happened, I remember being petrified at the thought that, in fact, all this research says there's stuff that happens in the first 2 years of life, which we don't remember at all as adults, that fundamentally place some imprint into us about how we think we have to navigate the world to stay safe. They're the deepest of our lenses. We have lenses that we wear because of the way, from what's our neurodivergence of how we process information that happens. What are the experiences that we've been exposed to versus others that give us a particular view? And particularly not just the experiences we've been exposed to, but the outcomes from those experiences. So all of those give us a shape of the world. So it's natural that when we start talking about something and disagree about something, you go, oh, hello, there's an elephant. There's an elephant here, because we've just sat a different perspective, and you go, no, it's this long, skinny trunk. And you go, no, it's this big side wall. What are you talking about? So we all sit at those different angles. They grow because we don't talk about those different perspectives. And so we get stuck in feeling right. and you go, I'm right, I see reality, this is the way it is, and how dare anyone else say that it's something different.
Totally makes sense. So then shrinking those elephants, I'm assuming part of it is that consciousness, that maybe a bit of curiosity, but I'm curious. Tell me more. How do we shrink them?
So now, in fact, actually, I'd go, there's a whole lot of detail that you might want to read in the book, but
yes, totally.
in a summary of it, the idea of how we shrink them. So I want to go back to just a little bit of brain science here, and not get too technical, rest assured, not too technical, but understand just a few bits about the way in which our brain operates. So people will have no doubt probably heard about the chemical cortisol. So a neurotransmitter of being, this is a stress cortisol. It's, when we pick up a pattern that's different, when something isn't quite making sense, or we see a pattern that we've seen before that has not ended well previously, we get a shoot of cortisol that comes in and gets us ready to react. And often when we have that shoot of cortisol coming up, if we're not aware of that, we can end up being quite defensive to what someone else is saying, or aggressive even in actually going, we've learned attack is the best form of defense and go against someone. Or we've learned to shrink in and go, we just freeze and just so much, because that's actually how we've learned to navigate things. And so when we want to go and shrink them, we actually need 3 different chemicals to be to get released in our brains in order to feel in a really great space to shrink an elephant. And so if you and I disagree with each other about something and we feel that tension rising, the first chemical we want to trigger each in each other is actually oxytocin.
Nice.
Now, often called the chemical of love, but actually in the workplace, think about this as a chemical of connection.
Yes.
I want to feel like I belong, like we're fundamentally tribal creatures. And so if I'm in the same tribe as you, then when we have that difference, we can go, okay, this feels a bit uncomfortable, but I like you because you're part of my tribe. So let's just remember that first. Let's get that connection. Then maybe we're more likely to be able to start to explore it.
Nice.
Turns out that's not quite enough. In the workplace context in particular, although you'd say outside work as well, we also need the neurotransmitter serotonin, which is all about the chemical that says this gets released when we feel valued. We feel valued for who we are and what we bring to the workplace. So if I want to shrink an elephant with you, I need to make you feel like you belong with me in my tribe, and I really value who you are and the skills that you bring to the workplace. Once we've done that, then we can get really curious, because what we've been able to do by getting the oxytocin and serotonin going is the cortisol's calmed down. We've got the cortisol under control and we're going, all right, we're in a safe environment. I like you. I feel like I belong with you. I feel valued by you. I can now get curious with you. And that then actually is what shrinks the elephant. So ultimately, the shorter answer is yes, curiosity shrinks the elephant, because we go, we've stumbled across an elephant here, kind of different perspectives. The only way we're going to shrink that is to try and triangulate the information that we've got, because then actually you go, oh yeah, it's not so big. And yes, we all get the shape of it. That's all good. But we need to feel safe in order to get curious.
Yep. I love that nuance.
And that curiosity then, that fires dopamine. Yep. So people get bad rap with dopamine, with social media, etc. We need dopamine. We just need the good levels of it doing good things. And curiosity in shrinking elephants and learning other people's, perspectives versus ours, beautiful way to get a lovely dose of dopamine.
Oh, I love that brain science. We love talking about the brain science, but I really like that nuance that you just added there, because that makes total sense. So thank you for sharing that, Genevieve.
Pleasure.
So good. So one of the things that I know your book talks about, and we want our readers to read the book because it's very important, is the whole concept of unconscious reactions and people having blind spots. So I'm really curious. These obviously play out as part of the elephants in the room. So what are some common unconscious reactions and blind spots that people would have around elephants that are starting to get a bit or a bit louder?
Yeah, so if I think about some of those common responses, I would go, and because ultimately, that when you sort of talk about blind spots, it is that piece about saying we don't actually realize that we're reacting the way that we're reacting, because I mean, that's the nature by nature. That's what a blind spot is. So we've learnt a pattern. And I talked a bit about going back to childhood. It literally is part of how we react. That unconscious reaction is actually rooted back in what happened in childhood. And we're learning so much more now about that, because, we used to talk about childhood trauma in the context of trauma with a big T, the significant impacts for people who really have not had a good upbringing at all. Whereas actually in the context that we talk about trauma with a small t is more, we've just learned by watching our relationships with our parents and siblings, if we had them, whoever was around us, how to make us feel safe, because that's what we need to do, is we need to feel safe. So what can happen is that, so for some people, that unconscious reaction is one of victim.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that reaction of it's not my fault, and worrying, and getting into that. It's not my responsibility, and it's everyone else, and all these other people have done things. So that automatic reaction of I'm okay. Now, sometimes that victim is a very timid victim. I've been really, really hard done by. Yes. Sometimes that victim response actually becomes almost a villain response of blame.
Mm-hmm.
And so more that aggressive response of no, I am right, and that person did the wrong thing. It's not my fault that I chose to do this, because I didn't choose to do it. I just did it because that person did that. So victim of timid, or victim of blame for others is a fairly common kind of unconscious response. And also you can see some people who are what we call yes people. Mm-hmm. So it's like I've learnt to be safe by agreeing. I'll just keep agreeing with the manager. Whatever they say, doesn't matter. I'll just do what they want to do. And so that's kind of that unconscious reaction of saying, I feel safe if I'm with that person. Others have learned right from the word go to, and we talk about being aggressive, of being quite aggressive always. And so just being able to go, no, like I've got reality of the world. So I'm right. This is it. Don't question me. I know exactly what we're going. You also find others who are insecure enough that unconscious reaction, again, is that little bit of that villain space, is undermining others, and being able to elevate what we are, because we're judging others in some way, shape or form that's really there. And the other thing is, going back to I'm right, one of the other classic things is what I call being a hero, which kind of sounds funny, because you go, isn't helping people a good thing? And it is. But so I love the quote, your advice steals my learning.
I hadn't heard that quote. That's a gorgeous quote.
Your advice steals my learning. And one of those unconscious reactions that you can see, particularly in people in management roles, is like, I'm the knight in shining armor, so here's a problem and I'm going to come in and fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that's not what you need.
I love that. And I love how you've sort of identified different versions, so we can all go away and do a bit of a reflection about which one of those. So when you were saying the yes people and I'm doing this, I'm like, I'm nodding. Exactly as you're saying that.
And, the interesting thing with these things too is that, like, sometimes, for some people, they'll remain blind for forever.
Yes.
Some people, unfortunately, have not learnt enough of that reflective piece to recognise what's going on for them.
Yes.
Other times you can, and I mean, this is with a range of different lenses. Sometimes you can have a lens that once you've realised it, you can actually go, actually, I can take that off, or I'm changed. Like, I'm now aware of something and that lens has shifted somewhat and I recognise things in a different way. And other times you can recognise you've got this lens and it's so imprinted that you're not going to remove it, but what you need to do is become aware of it, so that when you recognise a reaction, you go, oh, hello, there's that lens appearing again. Right, what do I do with that one?
Yep. Oh, I love that. Because so Robin Sharma has a quote which I really love, which is, with better awareness comes better choices, and with better choices comes better results. And so I would imagine Yeah, if you sort of start to get that, oh yeah, I'm aware now. Oops. The choices that people could make to support them to deal with the elephants better, I would imagine that becomes a bit easier.
Really, absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. And when you think about what was that in Man's Search for Meaning,
Yes.
the quote about saying, between stimulus and response there is pause, and in that pause is your freedom, because it's that ability to recognise that when something happens, when you sense that reaction, that ability to pause for a moment and go, whew, let's kind of breathe. What's that telling me about myself? And then what is the choice? And absolutely, you then make better choices. You're not in this automatic pilot response.
Nice, nice. Love that. So I loved there was a thing when I was looking at your book, which talked about how conflict can become an opportunity. And I'd love for you to share this with our listeners and our viewers, because a lot of people don't like conflict and there is opportunity there. So I'd love for you to share around that, Genevieve.
Yeah, there is such opportunity here in Danette. And I think it's an interesting thing because you're right, most people don't like it. Most people go, feel so uncomfortable when conflict comes up. And the ironic thing is actually by avoiding it, or because I kind of see the extremes. Most people go, they run for the hills and go, oh no, it's all fine. We don't need to talk about it. At the other extreme, you have the people that are bull in a china shop and just go, let's just talk about it, and let's get it all out on the table, and everyone has additional trauma from how the conversation goes. But there is, like, it's great to think about it. When people sit there and go, oh right, okay, we've got some conflict and people aren't talking to each other, and people see it as a problem, and it's just a problem that we have to solve so it can go away so we can get on with everything else. That's a missed opportunity.
Mm.
The thing that I see is that there's layers of opportunity when you've got conflict that you're faced with. The first layer, which I actually think is, I can say, more important than anything else. Well, they're all important, but we should keep learning for our lives.
Yes.
We need to be lifelong learners, and we are always, a work in progress. When people say, have you solved all the problems in the world, or solved yourself, sorted yourself out, and you go, I'll be a work in progress until the day I die. We need to keep thinking that we need to keep learning. And so when we're prepared to get curious ourselves about conflict, and think back to what I was talking about before with the quiet conflict, when those things, and so for me, that signal that there's quiet conflict is you start to feel that discomfort within yourself. So something's happened, and your brain unconsciously has created a story about what has happened and the meaning of that, that's causing you a level of discomfort. Whether that discomfort is tension and anger, or frustration or annoyance, or whether it's being upset or hurt, or any myriad of the different emotions we might feel, there's an opportunity. Because that reaction is an opportunity to go, hello, I've just got a bit of data about what's going on unconsciously for me, and here's an opportunity to bring that to consciousness and learn from that. So you can then sit there and you go, so what does that mean about the lenses I'm wearing? So what is the story that I've created from this particular situation? And what can I learn about myself in that? So absolute opportunity to learn in that way. And in fact, because when people say, so-and-so is not going to change, and, it's never going to work, it's never going to be able to resolve, you go, well, this is not just a two-way thing, this is about you. And so if you're walking away from it, then you're choosing not to learn about yourself and how you navigate the world better. The second layer of opportunity is actually in the connection between two people. So, if you and I have a disagreement, and there's tension, and then we go, oh, that was silly, doesn't matter, let's move on. We kind of keep, it can sit in the back of our mind, or it may not. It may just go, but we didn't do anything with it. The opportunity to have a conversation, the opportunity to go, can we sit down and just have a bit of a chat here? Because I think we've stumbled across an elephant here, and I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable. I'm sure you don't mean to make me feel uncomfortable, but I've kind of got this story in my head that these things are going on. Can I get curious with you about it? And you have the conversation together. You're able to go, Yes, we get the elephant now. And the moment that we've had one conversation that enables us to explore those opportunities, the perspectives differently, we then go, this is good. This is good. We're in a tribe here. We've shrunk an elephant together. So that the next time we come across an elephant, because do you know what? You will. The more you work with people, the more you'll hit elephants at times, that you go, hey, guess what, Danette? We found another elephant here. Let's have a chat. So you strengthen the trust in the relationship you have with another person when you're able to navigate that elephant together. So incredibly valuable to your relationships with people. Doing that, and in fact, both the lenses and then building trust, when you build your trust with other people and you learn about yourself within it, you actually improve your mental health. And you actually help the other person improve their mental health as well. So here's this massive opportunity to go, this is how we increase our mental health, improve our mental health by having those conversations. The third layer is then actually in the ecosystem of work, because actually when you're able to appreciate all of those different perspectives and able to talk through the tension and decrease it, you're actually feeling far more capable to go, actually, I want to raise my disagreements. I want to raise these different perspectives because I know it's a safe environment. And that trust in relationships and ability to talk about these different perspectives gives you much, much better outcomes in the business. So great opportunity at a personal level, at a relationship level, and a workplace level. You've got to love it.
Love it. And I was just thinking, how Google did the study years ago on Project Aristotle, where they talked about high-performing teams' number one factor is psychological safety. They're the elements that you're just talking about, which is, and how wonderful for people to learn these skills to be able to have conversations, and everyone grows and learns. I love it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, no, it was great. I mean, and in the book, I do talk about psychological safety and the nuance around it as well, because it's not a managers need to create it and that's it and it's right for everyone. Because, yes, leaders have an absolute role. There's a role you play in setting the tone of the organisation and how you operate. But when you think about everyone coming into the workplace with all of their different lenses, etc., you can think that you've got the safest environment ever, but that person with their lenses sees particular behaviour and suddenly goes, I'm not safe. Like I'm feeling the cortisol. I'm feeling really uncomfortable about things. So there's a self-responsibility that we have to have within all of this as well as individuals around owning the lenses that we wear and recognising when they get triggered, and to then go, how do I lift myself out of being a victim or a villain or a hero into this curious space of, co-learning about the elephant.
I love that. So we're getting towards the end, Genevieve, and I'm really curious, what else would you like to share? Because we're going to get you back with the full team. So until next time, what else would you like to share with our listeners and our viewers?
Oh, look, I think, there's so much. This, you probably can clearly tell I'm somewhat passionate about this space and getting people to think differently about it. I would just remind people, you can change your own brain chemistry and the brain chemistry of others by the way in which you intentionally elicit these chemicals. And learning how to elicit these chemicals in others is a game changer in your relationships. It's a game changer in that willingness to lean into discomfort and learn new things. And so, I think I would suggest to people a couple of things to consider. One is when you feel uncomfortable, the moment when you're feeling uncomfortable about something, just take a deep breath for a moment, find that pause and be able to ask yourself, what lens might I be wearing now? What is it what story have I got that's telling me I'm unsafe in this moment? Because that's essentially what that reaction is. When we've got that reaction of cortisol, our unconscious brain says, unsafe because something's different. So being able to breathe and go, oh, what's the story? So how do I get curious about that? The second thing, hard as it is, so one of my principles in Shrinking Elephants I talk about is accept multiple truths. So one of the most important things you can do is to recognise you have a truth, you don't have the entire truth, And that ability to accept that you've got that, therefore, one view of the elephant and people have other legitimate views as well. None of them are whole until you actually talk together. And one of the best statements you can have, I'm going to say questions, but it's actually not a question, but it's a request, is help me understand.
Beautiful.
So you can start, let's get that oxytocin and serotonin so we feel valued, and then look each other in the eyes and say, can you help me understand? Help me understand your perspective. And once I listen to you and you feel like you've been listened to, you will have a greater capacity to then go, okay, Genevieve, help me understand your angle on the elephant.
Love that. Love that. Now, Genevieve, I'm pretty sure some of our listeners and viewers are going to want to get in contact with you. So where are the best places for them to find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. So Genevieve Hawkins on LinkedIn. That's probably the most common thing, although I really don't like social media. I'm trying to get better at giving people tips and things. I much prefer podcasts and I much prefer the conversations than the social media. And also at genevievehawkins.com.au. So
Excellent.
website is there.
Beautiful.
And of course, if you want to find, I'm going to say me, but in written form, then my two books, Mentally at Work and Shrinking Elephants, on your favourite online bookstore. There's paperback, there's e-read and Audible versions.
Oh, awesome. And we'll put all those links with the podcast and YouTube descriptions as well. Fantastic. Well, Genevieve, can I say thank you so much for being our guest. That was such an awesome conversation. Cannot wait till we do the team conversation in the new year. And to our listeners and our viewers, thank you for watching us and listening to us. And as always, have a magical week.